Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Bernstein. I'm the Alumni Engagement Manager at Marlborough, and I am very excited to welcome you to our first Aiming High of 2021. Tonight, we are joined by 4 doctors from our alumni community, and I am so grateful that they are here, despite what I'm sure are very busy and very stressful schedules these days. Before we dive in, just a couple Zoom tips and tricks. I have some questions prepared for our speakers this evening, but I would love to also be able to take some questions from all of you. So if you will just drop those in the Q&A box, which should appear just at the bottom of your Zoom screen, I will keep an eye on that and ask some of those as they appear. I will also do my best to monitor the chat as well for any logistical or technical problems, but if you do have a question, please put that in the Q&A box so that I am sure to see it. I think that is all the Zoom housekeeping. So it's now my pleasure to formally introduce our speakers. Dr. Anderson from the class of 1993 is a pediatrician who also owns her own practice very close to Marlborough, right on Larchmont. Dr. Harbour's from the class of 2003. She is an obstetrics and gynecology physician. Dr. Mosqueda is from the class of 1977. She is a professor of family medicine and geriatrics and the former dean of the Keck School of Medicine of USC. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Mindy Park from the class of 2011. She is an emergency room resident in Washington State. So I really want to thank all of you for being here again. To give everyone some sense of structure, I think we will start, we'll talk a little bit about yourselves, your careers, your work in general, and then we will dive right into the topic that I know is on everyone's mind these days, this global pandemic that we are all living through. But to start off a little lighter, I did this sort of brief introductions, but if you all wouldn't mind sharing a bit more about yourself, your work, and maybe how you decided on the particular field of medicine that you're in. And Dr. Anderson, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, for having us here tonight. Hi, everyone. I see lots of fun friends, old friends in the chat, which is really fun to see. So as Megan said, I'm a pediatrician on Larchmont. I have own a private practice there with, there's 3 physicians in our practice. And I actually in 5th grade supposedly wrote in my St. James yearbook that I wanted to be a pediatrician when I grew up. And I got there, not very far from where I grew up. So after high school, I went to Stanford University, and then I did 2 years as a nursery school teacher at Stanford. They have a lab school and a lab preschool that I taught at. And I knew, like I said, I wanted to be a pediatrician. I knew I always wanted to work with kids and needed a break between college and medical school. And so I decided if I wasn't going to be a doctor or a pediatrician, I would probably be a teacher. And so I was a nursery school teacher for a couple of years and decided that wasn't really where my intellectual interest lay. And so I applied to medical school, and I went to medical school, University of Rochester in upstate New York. It's really cold and gray for the kid from Southern California. And so when I was done with medical school, I made a beeline back to Los Angeles and did my residency at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And after that, I moved to La Cañada and worked in a large medical group up there. But I was living in the Hancock Park area and was waiting for someone to open a pediatric practice on Larchmont in the Larchmont Medical Building, and thought I would just knock on the door and ask if I could join them. And no one ever did that. And so I decided to do it myself 7 years ago. And I opened my practice then. So I really have not gone very far from home. And I live in the neighborhood. I work in the neighborhood. I have lots of Marlborough students who are patients and lots of former Marlborough students, Marlborough alumni who bring their kids to me. So it's really fun to maintain that connection. And we see kids from 0 to 22. So we really, I got a really good variety in my life, which is really fun.
Thank you. Dr. Harbour, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Leia Harbour, and I am an obstetrician gynecologist. I'm actually a recent graduate from my residency. I was a little off cycle. So I've recently become board eligible. And so we're starting a new phase of my life. I'm doing temporary locums work until I sit for my boards in June, and then I'll be looking for more permanent positions at that time. After graduating from Marlborough, which was honestly such an awesome experience. I came later in Marlborough. I started in the 10th grade and I thought, oh, I'll just do like 10th, 11th, 12th, get what I need to get out of it. I'm not going to get into anything with being from an all girls school. No, I got the full all girls school experience. I had a hard time finding a date for prom. And I think that was one of the pinnacle parts of, did you go to an all girls school? But after leaving Marlborough, I got to go to my dream college for undergrad. I went to UPenn and I did biomedical engineering there. After UPenn, I actually did a postbac at UPenn in health sciences. And then I worked for 2 years. I didn't apply to med school right away, even though I did a postbac. I did HR, global HR relations in the US and China for Tyco International. And then I went on and did guest relations with Target corporations. During that time with Target, I was like, you know what, I think it was what they called Snowmageddon. And every time I went to work in the store, I got snowed in for 24 hours. And I was realizing I was doing 24-hour shifts at a Target. And I was like, okay, so I can handle the stamina of what you need to be a physician, but this is not really what I want to be doing with my life. So I got serious about my applications. I did research with a friend of the family that was at Howard University. We ended up publishing together. She recommended me for medical school there, and I got into Howard. And that is where I just had one of the most academically rewarding experiences ever. I was student council president there. I was on literally everything, every committee that there could have been. I did that and was still able to do my studies. And then I matched into LSU New Orleans. I like that Dr. Anderson said, you beelined back to LA. If you saw my residency rank list, I think LSU beat out a lot of places because I just thought that was the place that, okay, this is where I really need to be. But my number 2 was like Bayfront Medical. Number 3 was Hawaii. Number 4 was, I think, Loma Linda in LA. And I was just like, I need to be near some sunshine and some beach because I know this is going to be a hard situation. But New Orleans won me over. I was there for about 2.5 years, and it actually ended up not being the best fit for me. So I transferred to Meharry Medical College. And that is where I really found my niche and my home. And I ended up doing very well there. I served as chief resident there. And that was a unique experience because Meharry had very low volume within their home hospital. So we do a lot of away rotations, which gave me a lot of exposure to hospitals outside of just your little niche in your city. So I went to Memphis, I went to Detroit, I've been to Lafayette, and those are all very different places to practice medicine. And all of those places I went during the pandemic. So that was a very interesting thing to see, is how different regions are responding to the pandemic, how different hospital systems are responding to it. Oh, and I got into OB because I'm a talker. I like to engage people, but I really felt like surgical training was what was going to round out my training as a physician. But I just felt like surgeons, they see you for your pre-op visit, they take care of your problem, post-op visit, and you're done. And there was a small little of a social anxiety component there. I didn't want to be some famous heart surgeon in the grocery store and someone saying, that's Dr. Harbour, she saved my life. And I'm like, I don't know you outside of just seeing your chest open. I can't recognize you. So I liked that OB, you really get to engage your patients. You can see them from adolescence through their childbirth, through menopause. If they need a hysterectomy, you're really with them for a long period of their time. And I like that continuity.
Thank you. Dr. Mosqueda.
Yeah, well, yeah, I had a real zigzag sort of path. I thought I was going to go into veterinary medicine, but ended up going into people medicine with no regrets. Always knew I was interested in geriatrics. I've always just gravitated toward older adults, and so it's been a wonderful specialty for me. I entered it through the specialty of family medicine, so I'm board certified in family medicine and in geriatrics. Just because I like the holistic approach that family medicine takes. Did my fellowship at a hospital called Rancho Los Amigos, where I was heavily influenced as speech therapists, a really wonderful kind of extra education than we get traditionally in medical school, where I also then became interested in disability issues. So I'm quite interested in caring for older adults and also people who are aging with disabilities, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, et cetera. So I'm quite interested in those primary care aspects. While I was doing my fellowship, which I did for 2 years, so I did 3 years of residency after medical school, then 2 years of fellowship, I became quite interested in a sad topic, which is elder abuse and family violence related to a patient who had been abused. It really started me on my academic career as well. So I see patients part-time. I do house calls. I was in a COVID ward of a nursing home this morning, and I'm quite involved in research and also a number of administrative activities. I'm very interested in leadership and what leadership means. I should say I'm 60 years old, so I'm the senior on this panel. So I've been around for a while, and kind of went through the academic ranks of department chair and associate dean and then dean. So anyhow, I'm quite interested in leadership and what that means. And I'm very interested in the intersection and interaction of social justice and healthcare as well. So, and I like cats.
Thank you. We were talking before that Dr. Mosqueda's cat might visit, and I said, might hear my dog barking, sort of the joys of working from home.
Right. The other thing I should mention is I've been very happily married for 35 years, and I hope at some point we'll talk also about the importance of personal and professional lives and how they can, when it's good, they help bolster each other.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, again, last but certainly not least, Dr. Park. I have to jump in before she introduces herself and say it's such a joy to get to introduce her as Dr. Park. Dr. Park and I were at Marlborough together. We went to college together, and this is really the first time I've gotten to sort of formally introduce her. So I hope I didn't embarrass you too much, but I'm very excited for you and happy to have you here. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Megan. So I'm Mindy. I graduated in 2011. And like Megan said, we went to Marlborough together, and then we went to George Washington in DC together for undergrad. And I actually applied while there to their like undergrad BSMD program, which was kind of like a pipeline program. And going into college, I didn't know I wanted to do medicine, and it's something I kind of discovered that I was interested in freshman year. I wasn't particularly very good at science at Marlborough, but freshman year I did pretty well and decided that's kind of what I wanted to do. I got into the pipeline program, and so I went straight through from undergrad into medical school at GW. And then kind of my time in DC, I worked as an EMT, and I think that's how I eventually decided to do emergency medicine. And so while in medical school, I decided to join the Army. So now I work as an emergency resident for the Army up at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, just south of Seattle in Washington State. And so it's been kind of a wild ride. I know like COVID was, started up here. So that was pretty exciting for us when it started because we not only do we work with the military here and their patient population, but we also work up at the University of Washington in Harborview and the local hospitals here, which we've been able to see kind of the aftermath of how COVID started up in Kirkland, just north of where I am right now. And it's been kind of crazy working resident hours. I know that all of my co-panelists are all attendings now, and I'm kind of in the thick of it. I'm in my second year of residency. So it's been exhausting. And there are moments that are very, very rewarding. So if there's anyone who has questions about residency itself, I'm happy to answer those questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you all sort of mentioned this a bit as you introduce yourselves, but something I always like to ask at these aiming highs is, what were you involved in at Marlborough? And did you have at the time sort of any inkling that this is where you would end up? Was there something at Marlborough that you maybe look back on and think, oh gosh, that totally sparked an interest in X, Y, and Z? Let's go, we can go in reverse order. Dr. Park, do you want to start?
Sure. Like I alluded to before, I didn't think that I was going to do anything medical related. I actually majored in history in undergrad. And I started out doing international politics, and that's kind of what I started at GW doing. The one thing that I attribute to like my interest in medicine at Marlborough was doing the Red Cross team after doing the CPR class in 9th grade. And that was so fun, just running those drills during earthquake drills, and kind of doing all the moulage and pretending to, drag classmates out of rubble. So that's probably like the most, like the thing that sticks the most out for me that might have played a big role into the path that I took to medicine.
Well, I think if you were enjoying dragging people out of rubble in high school, you were bound to be an emergency medicine physician, Dr. Park. So that's great. Well, let's see. I would the main thing I was involved in actually when I was there, which was now it was in the 70s, was backstage theater stuff. I was really into lighting and sound design, and that was kind of my major hobby. But I would say one thing that really stuck out for me there were the teachers, just phenomenal teachers. And I think it's something that really has served me well throughout my career, this idea that, if you show an interest, people were willing to pour time and energy into helping you develop it even more, which I think was a really great lesson, because by having that, it encouraged me to keep behaving in that way as a student and a learner. So I would say it was the small classes and the teachers that really stood out for me.
I definitely agree with that. As I mentioned, that I didn't come to Marlborough until 10th grade, and that was just because I was in 9th grade. I was at the #1 math and science magnet public school in California, but I guess I was like 3 years ahead in math, and somehow that put me into regular bio, and we were coloring. And I was like, well, this isn't going to work. Clearly, I'm going to get straight A's, but I'm going to get straight A's in coloring. This school gets people into Harvard, but it's like I'm going to be very outclassed when I get to Harvard. I came home and I was just like, Mom, we're going to need to do something different. We're going to need to try private school. And I was like, how about Harvard Westlake? She was like, how about Marlborough? And I was like, that is not how I saw this conversation going. But I was very happy with where she directed me. And I think that I was very much so well placed after that. The biggest thing that I noticed was, while I was at a math and science magnet, they didn't have any sports. They had soccer, but it wasn't really a big thing. Golf was what they were really good at, golf and soccer. Maybe they had volleyball, I heard rumors. But I felt like at Marlborough, I could actually literally just do whatever sport I wanted. So I did track, I did soccer, I was in dance ensemble. I've been a dancer since I was 10. So I did dance ensemble, and then I did dance dimensions. once I took a photography course, I felt like I was all about photography. After that, taking yoga for PE, I was like, I'm going to be a yogi. I'm doing gymnastics. I'm the most flexible person there is. I just kind of, it really gave you that kind of sky's the limit type of feel. And I think what Dr. Mosqueda was saying is just about people really pouring into you when you have a passion. I really feel like that was there. I did do, I always had a knack for math and science. So I continued, that was another reason that I actually chose Marlboro, was because I was like, oh, they have multivariable calculus. So I'll be able to, I won't have to finish my math curriculum before I graduate from high school. I was really a nerd, so it's fine. But I really credit their physics teacher as well, Dr. Lingyatos, who was my physics teacher at the time. I was not good at physics, but he believed in me, and we got through AP and BC physics, and that was really, I don't know how I got through that, but it had to be with him. So I always kind of knew there was going to be a math and science focus. My grandfather was an engineer, my uncle was an engineer, so I was like, great, I'm going to be an engineer too. My grandfather, actually, his plan was to he went to Fisk for his undergrad, which is a historically Black college. And across the street from Fisk was Meharry Medical College, which was a historically Black medical college. They knew the dean. They were like, our son's going to be a doctor. My grandmother, they sent her to Fisk because Meharry was next door, and they were sending her to marry a doctor. He had a great MCAT score and terrible grades, and the dean was like, there's nothing I can do for this. So he ended up becoming, actually ended up being a rocket scientist working for Hughes Aircraft, but at the time, they didn't know what that was in the 50s. So my story was just that, okay, everyone's an engineer. Clearly we like to do this engineering thing, but I'm gonna actually finish this doctor thing. So I knew I wanted to be pre-med at some point, but my initial goals while I was at Marlboro was just thinking, okay, I got to get into somewhere for engineering. And in undergrad, I realized that's not what I really wanted to do at all. I've never worked as an engineer. So.
Well, I think for me, the two things at Marlboro, or there's kind of three things, I guess, that stood out. One was the community service requirement that we had to do in, I think it was in 10th grade. And I volunteered, like, I liked babysitting. And so I was like, at this time I didn't, even though I said I wanted to be a pediatrician in 5th grade, I didn't really know if I still wanted to do that or if I wanted to work with kids. But I volunteered at, I think it's next to Van Ness Elementary School. It's a school for the blind, for blind students. And I really loved that. I loved working with kids that, I didn't know. I wasn't babysitting. So I really enjoyed that work. And I really appreciated kind of the service part of like Marlboro having that be a part of our education, and that kind of has extended into my life and as an adult. And I think is part of why becoming a doctor was something that was really appealing to me, because there's a lot of service in being a doctor to our patients, and kind of going above and beyond and doing volunteer work because we have these skills. Almost a year ago, in early March, I went to Honduras on a medical mission trip. And I also volunteer every year at my church and put on a program where we buy Christmas presents for kids who have a parent in prison. So that service that Marlboro kind of started me on that path of service, and really trying to give back to the community in ways that I can, and having a career in service as a physician. And while I said I wanted to be a pediatrician in 5th grade, there were no doctors in my family. I don't know how much that thought really came back to me until I did took biology. I loved math and science at Marlboro, but biology by far was my favorite in 10th grade with Dr. Stewart. And I think that was the time that then I decided, in terms of an intellectual interest, biology goes along with being a doctor. And so kind of got me started on that. And I think the last thing about Marlboro is that I really felt like I could do whatever I wanted to do when I grow up. Like as long as it was something I was interested in and worked hard at, There wasn't anything that was off limits to me. So Marlboro gave me that too.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing a bit of your stories and about yourselves. I do want to pivot a bit to our ever-present pandemic. This is sort of a big question, but how has the pandemic impacted your work in each of your fields? And again, I realize that's a big question, so maybe give us just sort of a brief overview and then we can sort of dive into some more specifics. Dr. Harbour, would you want to start us off?
Sure. I've kind of been labeled by most of my peers as OCD at a baseline. So the thing that really changed for me was now I wear a mask and a face shield everywhere. I've been over sanitized. My hands are usually cracking by the end of every day. And I've thankfully taught my fiance how to wipe down everything pre-pandemic, so he didn't have to change much either. As far as our practice, I think especially with those that were those of us in training, so Mindy and I may have seen, well, no, you're in the ED, never mind. But I had a little bit lower patient volume, especially when the pandemic first started, because no one knew what was safe and what wasn't safe. So a lot of things just got shut down. Clinics were just shut down. Our clinic, within the first month and a half, I think like 3 or 4 people in the clinic of our staff got infected. So we just kind of said only absolutely, really just only the prenatal visits is all we did. Weren't doing any well woman visits. When things started to open up and we went to a phase 2, we had a few more surgeries, but it was really only surgeries that were absolutely indicated. We finally got to start doing more elective surgeries by the end of May. But that did have an effect on people's learning, because if you're not doing cases, you're not learning. And that's really paramount for a surgeon. I didn't get impacted as much because I happened to be rotating with an oncologist during that time. So everybody's surgery is mandated because they have cancer. So you can't tell a cancer person they can't have surgery. So that was thankful, but there was still a reduced volume. I think the biggest thing for healthcare workers, a good part of it was that we still got up and went to work every day. Everybody else was home. They were quarantined. They're looking at their walls and just their cat. And they're like, that's their new best friend now. And whereas we're getting up every day and going to work, the way my schedule worked out, I somehow had to take 2 vacations in April, or else I wasn't going to get vacation at all. But those weeks that I was home, I couldn't go anywhere. My father forbid me to get on a plane. Yes, I'm 35. He forbid me to get on a plane. And so I'm vacationing at home and I'm watching the news. And before I returned to work the next week, I kind of broke down in the shower. I was like, I don't want to go back, because what you're seeing on the news made it seem like there was fire and brimstone going on outside. And if you walked outside, you're going to drop dead. And I was like, I can't go back. I'm going right back into it. But I had to pick myself up and recognize and just kind of rely on the science. And some scary things about the science weren't helpful, which is that the virus is smaller than what the N95 can protect you from. But the virus does travel in droplets, which is big enough for the N95 to block. So you just have to kind of sort of recite those things as a mantra to help you rely on what is there to protect you. And you also have to be vigilant with what is around to protect you. Things that change are that you can't just take a sick day like, oh, I have a cold. No, if you have a cold, you need to get tested for COVID. You might be on quarantine. It's not just you can't just take a day. That's not a thing anymore. And it just, the hypervigilance that comes up is what's the most daunting, I think. Working in different hospital systems in different states in the last 6 months, I could see in Tennessee, we got mandated, everyone wears a face shield in May. It didn't happen in Nashville until July, and it didn't happen in Detroit until September, where we just said every interaction, you absolutely need to have a face shield, which pretty much means you just treat every single person like they have COVID, which really just worked in my favor, because there's so many times where you will see someone maybe in the ER triage, and you'll see them, they'll come in, they have a complaint, they go home, and they're back 48 hours later with a positive test. And you're like, but I just saw you 2 days ago. Thankfully, I had my mask on, I had my shield on, but you have to do a mental check, like, was I protected? Okay, I was pretty protected. And for healthcare workers, when it first started, if you had an exposure, you're home for 14 days, you're out, 14 days out. And then they realize if we do that with everyone, everyone's out. No one comes back to work and you don't have a team. Then it became, even if you're COVID positive, if you're asymptomatic for 72 hours, come on back to work. That was scary because that means people who are asymptomatic are back at work with you. But if you're following the protocols, you should be protected. So there's some give and take with that. Everything hasn't been perfect, but thankfully I've survived without getting it. But a lot of people in my department did. And so that's hard to see too.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, would you like to go next?
Well, thanks. I mean, what Leia said is certainly true. I would say, in addition, kind of some of the different stuff that I experience is I'm also a small business owner. Like, I own my own practice. I employ, like all of my staff, all the doctors in my practice. So not only am I trying to figure out, having to like come up and implement new workflows for my practice and how we're going to keep patients safe and how we're going to keep the staff and the doctors safe, which involve completely like revamping the way that we see patients. But I also had to think about, how do I keep my practice afloat? Like Leia said, our patient volume went down quite a bit. For us, most of our visits are well visits and for those, we have to see those patients in person. Like, and infants, I need to see them on a regular basis, make sure, do a full physical exam. I can't do that via telemedicine. So I'm having to, like, we still brought them in. We wanted them to be vaccinated because we don't want to have, more epidemics after this pandemic is over because we haven't been vaccinating. So, so patients who are needing vaccines and well visits who are on the young side, we had them still come in, but most of the time, half our business are like same day urgent visits, mostly ill visits where kids are really sick, or not really sick, but they're sick and they have a cold or an ear infection or pneumonia or sinus infection, or, they've sprained an ankle or injured themselves somehow. Those visits all got completely wiped out because now people were home. So kids weren't in school and in daycare and they weren't getting sick and they're not playing sports. So they're not getting injured. So we had, and then parents weren't wanting to bring, their kids, or they were delaying their checkups. So all of a sudden my income went way down. And so then I'm having to like learn about like getting a loan and the PPP loan, which I was able to get, but it was all this other stuff that I was having to do besides taking care of patients. So, and, trying to reassure my staff, and I didn't want to furlough them. For most of them, like their families are in the restaurant business or other businesses where they were the only one left working during this time. And so I was committed to keeping them because we were still able to go to work. We were still open. And that PPP loan was a lifesaver for sure. So kind of that being a business owner, which is the same for business owners across all sorts of different industries, and trying to figure that out. And then the other thing was really trying to help patients make all sorts of decisions. I was exhausted that spring. I was having to make all these decisions about my practice and my life. And then parents were calling and like, do I send my kid to daycare? Do I send my kid to preschool? Because those were open. How do we do a nanny? Parents are like, I can't handle working from home and taking care of my child. I'm going crazy. What do I do? How do I make the decisions that I need to make? And so it was really walking parents through making decisions. So not only was I making my decisions for myself, I was also really helping them make decisions. And everyone's anxiety was so high. And so trying to like maintain and manage my own anxiety, so that I could stay calm, cool, and collected, even though that's not what was going on inside of me, to make sure, to try and keep, like, as a leader in my practice, as the business owner, I have to stay calm so that they can, that they feel calmer and that they'll work well, instead of letting their anxiety take over them.
Thank you. Dr. Park.
Yeah, so in the emergency department, we've been seeing a ton of different things. Kind of similarly, in the beginning, the volume went down, which was really nice as a resident when you're working ungodly number of hours, just to like be able to sit and enjoy your coffee while like someone's in the waiting room is really nice. But that didn't last very long. Because a lot of people who were too scared to come into the ER or couldn't be seen by their primary care providers and get their regular checkups were getting really, really sick. And they weren't able to get their medicines, so they weren't taking their medicines, or they were trying to like spread their medicine out. And so we started seeing a lot of sick people in the ER. And I alternate between the ER and the ICU. So I saw kind of from both ends, from the emergency room and then also in the intensive care unit. I just got off of the neurosurgical ICU at Harborview Medical Center, which, fun fact, Grey's Anatomy is like based off of, which I was really stoked about when I came here for residency. But there was, so much volume there in the neurosurgical ICU just from other people getting, needing care for their brains. But because it was a little less volume, less people having head trauma than say the other ICUs, we became the spillover for the COVID ICU. So we were doing both. And it's really like a lot of the burnout from COVID on healthcare workers comes from a lot of, having to wear all the PPE all the time and being paranoid that every patient is COVID positive, especially in the ER, like anyone can walk in at any moment. So we're all, I'm always wearing an N95. I'm always wearing a mask. I'm always wearing eye pro. So basically like goggles. And then, so at all times, so that's pretty exhausting. And then having like our nursing staff get exposed, or my co-residents or my attendings who can't cover down for us, it's really, it was really taxing. And then emergency room specific, like we would have really sick people who were either medical or traumas, people who were in major car accidents or and needed like emergent procedures right there in the ER, and we're cracking open their chest and their lungs are like aerosolizing all of this COVID into the room. This happened so many times where the patient was so sick that we didn't have enough time to put all of our gear on. It was either our gear or them. And so at the beginning, like in the summer when a lot of this was happening, a lot of us were like taken out and we had to quarantine because we were getting so like we were just being like compromised all the time because we just couldn't get our gear on fast enough for our patients who were crashing so fast. And then also just like from another point of like burnout is like constantly telling your patient's family members that they can't come into the hospital. That's just like so heartbreaking. And it's like, it's really sad because like when I was working in the ICU, like, I was pronouncing all of these patients who were dying from COVID, and like the best I could do is like FaceTime their family members on iPads to have them say goodbye. Like we couldn't have them come up to the hospital, and that's really heartbreaking too. So that's like a lot of the like dark side of kind of like what I thought. I still love emergency medicine. I love critical care. I love the ICU, but those are kind of parts of COVID that we didn't expect to see, and that's kind of the reality of it. And I know that was like really dark, but I think it's a unique perspective that I have, and I'm really happy that like I have my co-residents who are kind of going through it together. And yeah, and at least now I'm vaccinated. I've got both my doses. So yeah, I'm trying to think of like other changes to emergency medicine. Honestly, it's kind of nice because a lot of the clinics in the hospital have been having lower volume or doing virtual. So a lot of my consultants, so like the surgeons that I need to call and ask for help for, or like even OBGYN or pediatrics, in family medicine and internal medicine, they have been a little bit more enthusiastic to come down to the emergency department to see my consults because they've had such lower volume that they're like, even my surgeons, they're like, I haven't had a surgery today. I need a cut. Do you have someone for me? Let me help you. So it's been really nice that it makes it like easier on me because they're kind of itching to get to see more patients too.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing all of that. Dr. Mosqueda.
Well, maybe I'll cover just something slightly different. So at the outbreak, I was the dean at the medical school. So I had about 6,000 people I was responsible for, anywhere from students to our staff to faculty. So there was just a lot of systems issues that I was figuring out related to how we were going to keep educating our medical students and what was the ethically appropriate thing to do with residents and first-year residents versus senior residents. And so there was a lot of systems issues going on, a lot of 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week for a long time. And a lot of teamwork, learned a lot about leadership and teams at that time, learned a lot about how if you don't pay attention to really caring for the people who are working under you, that nothing else matters. But then also figuring out the practicalities of keeping things going that needed to keep going. I think there were a lot of incredibly important ethical issues that came up. I've been involved at the state level related to how we're making decisions related to rationing care, who gets a ventilator, who gets taken off a ventilator, a lot of end-of-life discussions with my patients and with hospitalized patients who maybe didn't have advanced directives or and then I think this just put a magnifying glass on the inequities in our healthcare system. And, I've known it, but this was just heartbreaking to see what was happening in communities of color and people who were, it's great if you can quarantine but if you're living in a household with 14 other people in 2 rooms, what are you going to do? And so we did a lot of work with our communities and did a lot of Zooms to educate faith-based communities of color about what we knew and tried to help with problem solving. So it was also a role for a medical school, for an academic unit in the community to see what we could do as partners with our community as well. So I'll leave it at that. Those were just a few of the things that we were looking at.
Thank you. Gosh, there's so much I want to ask you and we're already dwindling on time, but I do want to get to the thought that Dr. Mosqueda brought up about, I guess at its core, that work-life balance and having partners, romantic or otherwise, who sort of are able to support you and that you can lean on. And I'm wondering, I guess it was sort of half and half in this group, the load decrease versus load increase. But maybe if you could talk a bit about how you've been balancing all of that through the pandemic and even before the pandemic. Dr. Park, you talk about the crazy hours that you work as a resident. And so, yeah, if you could talk maybe a little bit about that balance and your support systems, and then if we can sort of wrap a lot into one question, maybe too about how, those of us who are not in the medical field and are managing some of this COVID anxiety as well, going to the grocery store has now become a bigger to-do than it has ever been, certainly in my lifetime. And just sort of maybe tips on how you're managing your own COVID anxiety, if you have any, and maybe for all of us out there who maybe could use some tips as well. Dr. Anderson, do you want to start?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question? I was trying to remember the second part and I forgot the first part.
I put too much into one question. Just sort of your work-life balance and your
work-life balance, yeah. So I think I'm fortunate my family is nearby, and they have, and they're actually, my parents are both on this. My dad's a former trustee and my mom went to Marlboro. So, but my family has been, my parents have been definitely a big part of my support system. And, you know, in the beginning, we weren't seeing each other in person. We still don't see each other very often. But we, you know, kind of, I think, maintaining that connection and checking in with each other on how we were doing. And then, also, you know, finding new ways to socialize, and for me to be with people outside of medicine was really important, where I could just kind of, you know, they could tell me what shows they were watching because I wasn't watching any shows. I was too busy trying to figure out how to keep my business alive. But but having those social moments with people outside of medicine to kind of give me a perspective was quite helpful, and also maintaining like some sort of exercise. So I've gone on a lot of walks, but also I think just getting outside. I mean, wearing a mask and you know, taking all of the precautions that we need to, but getting outside each day. I think those little things are really important. And I think in terms of maintaining my own COVID anxiety, it's the exercise piece, getting outside, taking care of the other parts of my life. I am not married and I don't have a significant other right now. So I don't have that part of my life that I have to balance, but it does require me finding other ways to have support. And then I think the other thing for me in terms of the COVID anxiety, managing that, was trying not to watch the news and read newspapers. And it was really me. While I had to learn so much about COVID, I really tried to like focus on more my medical resources versus reading the sensationalism of the news. Because that just could have me spin out of control. And then I think, so I think all of us have probably gotten our COVID vaccine in our second dose. I just got mine this last weekend. So that certainly has decreased my anxiety a little bit about myself, but we all have to stay vigilant. We still have to wear masks. We still have to wash our hands. We still have to stay socially distanced. And so, you know, I think if we can continue to use those precautions, that even as we get vaccinated, I think, you know, it will work. It's just gonna take some time. So whatever each of us needs to kind of stay grounded and stay normal as much as we can, and like hold on to ourselves. And finally, for me, another big source of support has been my church and my faith, and the way that my community has come together has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy that you've all received vaccines and that you're on the front lines of this and safe. Dr. Mosqueda, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's not so much about work-life balance. For me, it's just a juggling act. and it's never imperfect balance. And that's fine. And I realize now that things just sort of come and go in waves. So, I mean, I'm fortunate to have married a really wonderful guy who's just there, and he's not in the medical field, and so I think when you have a good relationship, be it a marital relationship or any other kind, if you have good relationships, it's really helpful, and if you have bad relationships, it's really harmful. And so figuring out how to have the work-life juggling act, I think is important, and it takes attention. You have to pay attention to that. It's not just going to happen by accident. I think the other thing that's been really helpful to me, and this has been now for, I don't know, going on 30 years or so, is meditation. So I meditate almost daily, and am quite immersed in that, and have found that to be very helpful. So that I am for the most part calm, and believe that we have a lot of good to do in the world, and that this is an opportunity to prove it.
Thank you. Dr. Harbour.
I know when people think of medical school, they think it's just 4 drudging years of you never going out, never having fun. And then when you get to residency, it kicks it up to another notch. But med school was enjoyable. I don't know why I decided to deem myself in charge of all parties at medical schools, but I was the vice president of activities. I threw every party. Not saying that I partied that hard. I threw the party. I didn't always go to the party. Please don't confuse that. I provided the party. I got everyone on the club list. They're all on the VIP list. I didn't always show up, but I made sure there was a party. There should be activities for you to release at least after every exam. Every exam you should be releasing and having some sort of breathe moment with your classmates. And so there's definitely that time in medical school, and you really are kind of more in charge of your own schedule, especially with even prior to the pandemic. You have the option of streaming your classes. Most schools, I believe, have the option of streaming their classes. They tape them. You have note takers. I'm someone who was much more nocturnal. I usually would, on my own schedule, go to bed around 2 a.m. The person I was dating didn't stop studying till 4 a.m. So I was like, challenged, but I don't know if I can hang till studying till 4 a.m. But with that, I wasn't going to be up for class at 8 a.m. alert and ready to answer questions and ask questions, but I could stream it from my bed, and that was helpful. So you have more control over your schedule. When you get into your clinical rotations in your 3rd year, you do not have control over your own schedule. You do need to be there between 5 and 6 a.m. and you need to be well rehearsed and well rested. So I would say your 3rd year is probably more of a stringent year because you're required to be at this job. You're taking board exams every month to 2 months. And so that's probably the most stringent year, but you've probably spent the first 2 years, or your goal would be to spend the first 2 years of medical school. If you haven't figured out how you study, you really hardline and figure out what it is that you do to be successful. And then when you get to residency, it's very similar. You have a yearly in-service exam that you're studying for in addition to your job, but residency is difficult socially because you're at work and this is the height of the most professional profession you can be in. But then this is also your family that you probably need to figure out if you can go out and hang out with them and have drinks and do happy hour, but they're also your colleagues. So there's a balance with that, but residency can also be fun. It doesn't have to be just waking up and go to sleep. There will be rotations where all you do is you wake up, you go to sleep, you have a nightmare about what's going to happen the next day, you wake up and you go back again and you go back into it. But you do have that time. There are slower rotations and faster rotations and grueling ones and rewarding ones. And you have to kind of take all of that and integrate it. And I think Dr. Mosqueda said it best. It's not really about planning a work-life balance. It's more so juggling. I have to release, so I'm going to now prioritize this release and make sure that it happens. I was in a relationship for the first time in my life, didn't have a boyfriend until I was well into my mid-20s, but had a boyfriend all through med school. And really, I think I just had a really strong study partner. We went hard with the studying and we were on the same sleep schedule, so that worked. In residency, I still was able to find time to date, a little bit, but I don't think that I performed as well if I was dating. So I would say not as much that. And then when I transferred programs to Meharry, I had already been in a relationship for a little bit before, and we did long distance, which was very um, taxing. Um, and my partner is not in medicine. And so that was very difficult for him to understand those rotations where I wake up at 4:30 and don't get home until 7. And I'm like, I just need a minute. Um, what I think COVID actually did do for us was, because everyone's now working from home, when I did an away rotation, and the grueling one was in Detroit, where you're working 16-hour days, he came and stayed with me that entire rotation. And it was nice to have a partner there who enjoys cooking. And so making breakfast and packing me a lunch and making dinner, I don't know if the rotation was much more enjoyable with him there. And I think it was also helpful for him to see, this is what she's doing every day. This is what she's putting into it. This is why when she gets home at 7 o'clock at night, she doesn't want to talk to me. She just needs a moment. I can understand that. So it is possible to have relationships. It's possible to have helpful relationships. I clearly had codependent ones. I don't know that that works for everyone. I don't know if that's healthy for everyone, but it worked for me, and I'm thankful for those.
Great. And Dr. Park?
Yeah, so definitely work-life balance is not something that you should go into residency expecting to have at all, which is kind of hard because, I am burnt out, I am exhausted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have good days. I think the biggest key in residency, just to maintain some kind of normalcy and balance, is to take advantage of any free time, and then don't plan something immediately after when you're supposed to get off work, because anytime you make plans, you will not get off work on time. That is like the rule of thumb in medicine. So I don't know. For me, work-life balance is kind of tough in residency, and I know that. And I'm a very competitive and independent person. I came into residency dating someone, and I ended that relationship partly because I wanted to focus on residency, and my partner wasn't quite, in line with my drive. And being in the army, it's already male dominant, and then medicine is already really male dominant. So I've got a lot of competition, and so it's been kind of pep talking myself every day to kind of go to work, put in the work, kind of compete with the boys. But when I have free time, I, take advantage of it. Living in Washington State and during the pandemic, like, this is like the perfect place, I feel like, for me, because I'm a very active person and I go outside. And so, like, literally, like, Mount Rainier is like an hour and a half. So I've been really getting into touch with like being outside. I know that a lot of people have been going on walks, and for me it's just like finding another mountain to hike. So that's really nice for me because it's really convenient for, like, it's in line with my interests. And I also got a quarantine dog, which probably wasn't like the best idea for a resident because I'm paying so much money for doggy daycare. But for my mental health, it's like the best thing ever, just to come home. And I'm exhausted. I don't want to have to explain to someone just like what I've just seen today, and just my dog like putting his head in my lap is like all I need. I know that I don't have like the best answer for work-life balance because I am a resident, but I think it's important to just highlight the reality of residency for anyone who's interested in medicine. But that, resiliency is key, and kind of trying to find, happiness and joy in the small amount of time that you have is really important. It's tough because like my best friends here are my co-residents because I don't know anyone else here. I don't have time to make other friends. And if I'm not at work, they're usually at work. But when the stars align and you both have a day off, like, it's there's nothing better than like having a day off with your co-residents. So it's almost as if like residency makes days off like even better than regular days off. So that's kind of how you have to see it.
Thank you. Well, I know now we are over time, and like I said, I could really spend all evening talking with you, but I don't want to take your free time away, as Dr. Park just pointed out. So I do want to thank all of our fellow alumni for joining us this evening, but I especially want to thank the four of you. You have chosen such a noble profession in quote unquote normal times, and I just cannot imagine the burden that you're all carrying as we sort of live through this crisis. And I just hope you know how much your work is appreciated and seen, and certainly does not go unnoticed. So thank you for sharing your very precious free time with all of us this evening. And I hope that all of you continue to stay safe and healthy. So thank you. I hope we will see everybody at our next Aiming High on February 18th. Thank you again, and good night.